Hey guys, welcome back to the Black Hills and Eastern Railroad. Today we're going to talk about soldering feeder wires. You can do this to make your trains run more smoothly across your DCC system and evenly distribute power throughout your layout. I've got 7 big tips for you coming up. Number 1, wear your eye protection. You never know when stray solder might spatter up or some other unforeseen circumstances might come up. No smooth running trains are worth an eye injury. Step number 2 would be to disconnect power from your command station. This would prevent any possibility of power backflowing over your home's 110 wiring system and somehow damaging the command station. This is probably unlikely, but it's an easy step you can take to absolutely prevent against any possibility of damage to your command station. Tip number 3, use a good soldering iron. Here I'm using a Weller soldering iron. This is, I believe, the model WLC 100. This is up to a 300 watt iron. I suffered through a lot of poor, cheap soldering irons, and I've probably installed more DCC chips in blue box locomotives than I care to count. They burn through their tips, and this particular unit has I believe a thermostat in it, so when it's done heating up to temperature, it turns off. It doesn't continue to apply heat. But it is good heat. It's variable temperature on this. So if you're doing decoder installs, typically you want it not so much heat, but if you're installing heavier wire, or if you're soldering on heavier wire or track feeders or things like that, you typically want more heat, and you can get it here if you need it. Number 4, bend your wire. Typically, what I like to do in order to aid the feeder wire for being installed correctly onto the rail or easier to solder, I bend close to a 90-degree angle on the feeder wire. This is 18 gauge wire that I'm using here. I'm using a white and a black, one obviously for one side of the railroad and the other side for the other rail. So I've got the 90-degree angle bent here, and I'm going to take and bend it once more time at probably about a 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to insert this down through the sub-road bed, and that'll make a nice angle for the rest of the wire to oppose the road bed and hold itself up against the rail while I'm soldering. Tip number 5. You limit the amount of heat you use. We want to limit the amount of heat we put on the rails to the bare minimum needed to get that solder joint made. Any more than that will start melting ties and just generally not serve our purpose as well. What I'm doing here is I've got a pair of 1-2-3 blocks and a couple of needle-nosed curved beak pliers that I've got rubber bands on to hold the beaks closed to use as heat sinks while I'm actually making this solder joint. I haven't been doing this regularly, but if it helps you makes you feel better, and you don't know exactly how much heat you're applying or going to need, this is a good way to get started, especially if you're in an important spot where you don't want the ties to be disformed. Then after you're done soldering, the next step is to turn the power back on to your DCC command station and make sure you turn track power on. You can hear the engine start up in the background. Number 6 and number 7 go kind of together, hand in hand here. Number 6 would be, tip number 6 would be to use the appropriate size suitcase connectors. In this case, I'm using 3M Scotch Lock model 567, no relation to the EMD prime mover by the same model number. Anyway, these suitcase connectors, as they're sometimes called, are sized to the 2 wires you're joining. And in this case, I'm joining 12 gauge wires to 18 gauge wires. Yes, you heard that right. I've got 12 gauge bus wires. I've got kind of a long run here on this below the Sioux City yard. I'll probably continue that practice for the upper levels, at least for these long runs here anyway. But again, you can buy these Suitcase connectors sized to your size bus wires and your size feeder wires. What I've typically been doing here is joining one bus wire and 2 feeder wires with 1 connector. So find which connector is the right for your wire size, stick with that, and use these. These prevent you from having to solder under the bench work and over your head, which I find most unpleasant. And finally, tip number 7 would be to attach your bus wires via the Suitcase connectors with the power turned on. Ask me how I know. Well, I'll tell you that I've spent some time troubleshooting after I've put in a bunch of bus wires and feeders and had a dead short. If I solder these or if I attach these bus wires with the DCC system turned on, I'm going to get an audible alarm immediately if I've done something wrong. And to add to that, it'd be a nice idea to make these attachments or make these joints with the music turned down so you can hear your DCC system, or maybe have a locomotive in the vicinity that's running on that has a sound decoder in it, and have that turned up. And if that stops as you've made a joint with your bus wire from your feeder, you know you have a problem. These Suitcase connectors are very simple. I'm just inserting, in this case, 2 bus wires or 2 feeder wires, and then with just a standard pliers. And they do make a special crimper for these, but I don't feel like spending the money on one of those. All I have to do is basically I'm shoving in a spade in there that cuts through the insulation on both the bus wire and the feeder at the same time and makes that electrical joint. You get good continuity out of that. It's very easy to do, and you don't have to solder over the top of your head. That should about wrap it up for the feeder attachment video. Hope you liked it. If you did, make sure you hit the like button, consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next one. A little bit of an update on what's going on here. I hope to get an update, a construction update on the layout here out. I know I haven't done that on the channel here yet, but there isn't really a whole lot to see other than the Sioux City yard here. But wanted to show you guys my plans for the space that we have here. We do have a nice space, and I hope that these plans come to fruition with tracks on the main deck and the upper deck at some point, maybe this summer, but we'll have to see. Again, spring has sprung here in a big way in South Dakota, so we're going to be moving most of the Black Hills and Eastern Railroad activities outdoors. We've got some work to do on the 445, and we've got some garden work. I want to show you guys the tomato cages in the garden that we use. We've had good success with those in the last couple of years. We need to refill our pizza sauce stocks, and so we're hoping for another good year on the tomato production, but we'll have to see. And also we've got spring soccer starting up here in South Dakota. So we've got twin girls that are doing that, and so that's going to take time away. So the production of videos may slow down a little bit, but hope you'll be patient with us, and I hope you'll stick with us.